Спасибо большое. А теперь мы приглашаем выступить с докладом «Видение будущих 6G коммуникаций» Мухаммед Сли Алуани, профессора научно-технического университета имени короля Абдаллы, Саудовская Аравия.
Дорогие друзья, мы рады приветствовать одного из выдающихся ученых, не побоюсь слов, ученых мирового уровня. Да. Он, Мохаммед Сли Алуани, закончил университет Пасадена в Калифорнии, сам он родом из Туниса, сейчас работает в университете короля Абдуллаха в Саудовской Аравии. Бизнес фирша у него получила по обстоятельству 80, да. Он согласился к нам приехать и рассказать о своем видении 6G, да. Мы тоже немножко знаем про 6G, да, но от того, если мы будем вместе знать все, наверное, и все будем лучше это понимать. Он будет делать доклад на английском языке, да. Ну, послушаем на английском, верно? Хорошо. I talked about your short biography and about the tempo of your report.
Thank you. Okay. Yeah, I can use this. Thank you. Okay. Thank you, Professor Andre, for this nice introduction. I would like to start by thanking actually Professor Andre and Professor Ammar for inviting me and for giving me this opportunity to share with you some of our work on 6G, or to be more specific, some of our perspective and vision for 6G. So the theme may be controversial, right? Because actually, if you look at the news, people are talking mainly about 5G, and the talk is about 6G. And I will tell you why actually we are focusing on 6G from a timing perspective. But the message that I would like to convey is that 6G would be, from our perspective, about two key issues. One is about super connecting the people who are already connected, trying to improve the level of connectivity for people who are connected. And then, on the other hand, one big probably mission of 6G would be to actually connect the many people that are still unconnected in the world. So let's kind of look at the outline of the talk. So it's again a little bit provocative to say what has 5G been. I mean by that essentially, although 5G is being deployed as we speak, we start as researcher in the area of wireless communication working on 5G for the last, let's say, 10 years. So now, as a cycle of a generation of communication system is evolving, it's natural to start talking about 6G. So I would like to kind of tell you what are, from our perspective, some of the key technology for 6G, and then focus on this kind of important problem of connecting the unconnected and how global connectivity can be viewed not only as a challenge, but rather as an opportunity to connect all these unconnected people. Now, the talk actually is a little bit compressed in the sense that I will omit some slides. The slide will be made available. Professor Andre and Professor Ammar, feel free to contact me or contact them to essentially have a copy of the slides which go into a little bit more details. But given the time allocated to me, I will try to be a little bit fast. So in particular, I will not talk much about some of the research we are doing in the area of optical wireless communication, which in our view can help kind of connect the unconnected people or kind of work towards bridging the digital divide. So let us start from talking about how we are moving from 5G to 6G. So obviously, I don't think I need to motivate 6G or wireless communication in general. We have seen this kind of revolution that happened over the last 4 or 5 decades with this kind of continuous increase in terms of number of users, this continuous increase in terms of amount of data that we transfer wirelessly, and that obviously is putting like capacity limits on wireless networks. So this is an important slide. It shows the evolution from 1G all the way to 5G. It's a tiny 10-year cycle. It takes about 10 years to kind of develop, design, eventually deploy a generation of wireless communication system. By the end of the decade, the system becomes mature and we move on to the next generation. So now we are at a critical time. We are at the time where basically we are in 2020. We are at the early stage of deployment of 5G, which means from a research perspective, it's the time to start brainstorming and thinking about 6G. So this is obviously not only ourselves doing that. If you do a quick Google search, you will see that there are a lot of initiatives. The closest is actually in Finland. Last year, I was lucky to be part of this first G6G summit in Levi, Lapland, in Finland. And this year, exactly 1 month from today, there will be the second edition of this 6G summit, where many researchers coming from all over the world trying to kind of think, brainstorm, or get some perspective on what 6G should be. So obviously, one aspect of 6G is going to be pushing the envelope, doing what 5G is going to start doing very soon and much better. So for instance, as you know, or as you may know, 5G has different use scenarios. For example, EMBB, Enhanced Mobile Broadband, which is super high speed communication, ultra low latency communication, massive type, machine type communication. And these are what we know as independent user scenarios. 6G may need to kind of combine some of these user scenarios. So if you talk about gaming, for example, you may need to have application where you need super high speed combined with ultra low latency. So this is one aspect of 6G, which is about pushing the envelope, trying to push performance limits in terms of rate, capacity, deployments of these networks. So if you want to read more about that, we had like a, we wrote, so I'm going in the wrong direction here. Yeah, we wrote a perspective paper. It's in Nature Electronics. It appeared last month, and it gives kind of a little bit the vision on this super connecting aspect of 6G, and I invite you to kind of read it if you are interested in this topic. Now, that's one aspect. What is the other aspect we would like to emphasize? The other aspect is motivated by much bigger trends. So, as you know, world population is growing. There is this trend of movement of people from rural area to urban areas, which is leading to essentially the creation of more and more of these mega cities. All of these are important problems. The United Nations is looking carefully at this evolution of these trends. And there has been, a few years ago, the establishment of the so-called Sustainability Development Goals. These are important noble goals that the United Nations put together in order basically to create a better quality of life, a more prosperous world, a world where basically inequalities are kind of reduced. So our hope, or at least some of us who work in wireless communication, think that while 5G and the previous generation of wireless communication system were mainly driven by profit, by financial profit, because mobile network operators basically were the main driver behind this generation of system, that actually these SDGs, or Sustainability Development Goals, are going to be driving, or at least in part driving, 6G. Which means, while 6G will continue trying to push the envelope, will try to do things better, faster, with a higher capacity, it is our hope that 6G is going also to address one of the key blind signs of 5G and before, which is the problem of digital inclusion, or the problem of connecting the unconnected. Now obviously, and that's a little bit beyond the scope of this talk, 6G has to be even more secure and more safe than what we have today, or what 5G is going to offer. Why? Because we'll be relying more and more in our daily life on wireless transactions. So, if you will, this is kind of a summary of what I have said so far. This is the famous 5G diagram of the user scenario, where in blue we have enhanced mobile broadband, super high speed. In red, massive machine type communication. This is massive deployment of IoT-like devices. And then in green, ultra reliable and low latency communication. For instance, like Professor Ammar and Professor Andre are working on here, tactile internet. These are the three famous 5G user scenarios. What we are arguing is, of course, we need to keep pushing the envelope, trying to do these things better, maybe combine them, as I mentioned earlier, but also add to that a very basic kind of requirement where we would like to see basic internet access or global access to internet for all. It's known as Gaia. How to provide internet to basically a very large proportion of world population. So let me start by talking about super connecting the connected and highlight one new technology that probably you need to hear about, and tell you why this is an interesting technology that a lot of people are kind of looking at these days. So I would like to start with motivation. I mean, obviously spectrum is a limited resource. We're always competing for spectrum. And one particular metrics we'll be always trying to optimize is the area traffic capacity in bit per second per meter square. So you can divide up and down by node and by hertz. You end up with these three famous metrics. Bit per second per hertz per node, that's spectral efficiency, that's the number of bits you squeeze within the kind of highway of information linking your smartphone, let's say, to the close access point. Network density, the number of access points per unit of coverage area, and the spectrum. Obviously, if you are living in this world, and you want to go into this much better world where performance is 1,000 times better, you need to improve along these three directions. You need to be more spectrally efficient, you need to densify your network, and you need to go for more spectrum. Now, when you look at things from this perspective, very quickly, you can kind of organize all the kind of research that's being done in our area, or most of it. If you go to the famous conference in this field, you will see sessions on massive MIMO, on spectrum sharing, on optical wireless communications, and these are some of the kind of interesting research directions that people are pursuing. I would like to focus on one particular technology, which is one of the emerging technology. It's known as artificial radio space, or smart radio space. It started about, I would say, I mean, it has been there for some time, but there has been like an impressive amount of research done over the last 1 year or so on this topic. So what it is? Smart radio space. It's a very kind of simple concept. The idea is that it's a natural evolution in a way of communication theory. For those of you who are active in communication theory, you know how things have started. It started in the 40s, you know, where basically people focused on trying to optimize receiver, right, for communication system. Then by the 80s, 90s, people assume that they are able to estimate the channel or predict the channel ahead of time and try to optimize transmitter. So we end up having now receiver and transmitter optimization, or if you will, transceiver optimization. So what will be the next step? You optimize the receiver, you optimize transmitter, so obviously you start thinking, how can I optimize the medium of communication, the channel? And that's the area of smart radio space. How can you change your channel? How can you make modification to the channel in order to improve your end-to-end performance? Okay? So it can be done in multiple flavors. So for instance, one of the work we did with one of my former students, she's now a postdoc in UBC in Canada, we have a base station trying to combine or to communicate with a hotspot of users. Let's assume there is a bad line of sight, bad communication between this base station and this user in a direct fashion. What we'll do, we'll take a building in the neighborhood, paint it with passive, low cost, low energy consuming and reflecting elements. Essentially, every one of these elements is acting as a kind of a phase shift. So essentially, it's a passive element, it gets an incoming wave, it induces a phase shift and retransmit or reflect the signal. Now, from a design perspective, what can you do? You can obviously try to kind of design your optimal precoder, but in the context of smart radio space, what we are trying to do is to pick the best phase shifts in these elements in order, for example, to maximize your sum rate or to maximize the minimum SINR of any particular user. So these are the kind of design problems that are new to us. We used to kind of optimize transmitter or receiver. Here we are optimizing a relay, a passive reflector on the way of our path. So let me kind of show you a different kind of perspective. So again, here you have a base station trying to communicate with the user. Let's assume there is a blockage, but you will take advantage of a reflecting surface to basically kind of reach this user. Now, one of the nice things about the recent developed metamaterials, and that's thanks to a lot of discoveries in physics and material science, actually you can design materials that act as reflector in defiance to Snell law, which means that the reflecting angle is not necessarily equal to the incident angle. Now, what can you do with that? What you can do is, you can basically minimize your not spot, minimize your interference, and create more secure environment. Let me go a little bit fast here because I want to go to the second theme of my presentation and give you a very simple example to illustrate what I'm talking about. So we have a base station in black trying to communicate with all of these points here. On our ways, there are some buildings, obstacles, that basically block the signal. And let's assume that we go with a very simplistic model, that if you are behind an obstacle, you are basically not reachable, and you are a not spot, a red spot. Now, that's what we are starting with. Now, let's assume that we allow ourselves to change one of these obstacles into a reflecting surface and see what can we do. In particular, we chose to replace this particular building or paint this particular building with a reflecting surface. And what you end up having is you move from this to that. Now, the base station is here, is able to reach all of these red spots that used to be unreachable because there were these obstacles. Because of the fact that this building is acting as a reflector, we kind of widen the coverage area of interest. In other words, this is what we used to have, green being the reachable region, red being the not spot, or not covered region, to something like that by changing only one building, making the reflecting surface. Now, to stay within time, I will skip or go very quickly to the next slide. We need a full analysis of this problem. In other words, the kind of problem we are looking at is assuming that these reflecting surfaces are deployed randomly in a particular city. What is the density of reflecting surface we need to inject in this coverage area to minimize our not spots? Our analysis shows that if you start with something like that, where you have the base station are here, there are a lot of obstacles, and all the red spots are not spots, are basically bad coverage area. If you start with 0% of reflecting surface, that's what you have. If you go from 0% to 5%, already you are doing much better. You reduce quite a bit your not spots. You go to 10%, you are left only with 4 not spots. By the time you reach a ratio of 40% of your building that are transformed into reflecting surface, essentially you eliminate every single not spot. So that's the beauty and that's the potential of this approach, and we think that can be one of the strong technology or candidate technology for next generation of wireless communication system. Why? Because it allows you to increase your coverage without having to increase your density of deployment of base station or active base station, which means it doesn't come at the cost of extra power, basically the deployment in your city. So we need a lot of more work on that, but let's keep that to be within our kind of scope or time. Another important technology, obviously, people are talking that 6G is going to offer this terabit per second communication capability. Why we need that? Maybe 10 years down the road, I will not be in front of you. I'll be maybe in my office, and there'll be holographic kind of transmission, and you'll be like you'll see my hologram basically giving the presentation on my behalf while I'm real time doing that in my office. So to do that, you need, of course, like a super kind of high data rates, and you need to go to this extreme bandwidth communication. So the two candidates for that is terahertz. So that's basically the next kind of band that has not been used for communication so far. It's beyond millimeter wave. It comes with a lot of challenges, but we start looking at that. We start also piggybacking on communication to do a few other things like sensing, imaging, and localization by taking advantage of the short wavelength that is the mode of operation in terahertz. But obviously, another very kind of promising, although it has been there for many years, is optical wireless communication. How to use visible light communication like LEDs or free space optics, laser, to communicate. Although it comes with its own challenge due to turbulence, due to weather condition, maybe 6G will kind of allow a revival of this technology that kind of missed the 5G train. But if we run out of spectrum and need super high speed, optical wireless can be one of the good solutions that can be adopted. So let us now go to the second message I would like to convey, which is not the super connecting the connected, which was the first aspect of the talk, but rather connecting the unconnected. I call that connecting the base of the pyramid, and that's not my own word. The base of the pyramid comes from this kind of one way to categorize populations or countries or people is basically by their income. And if you do that, there is this famous paper written by economists in the early 2000s, where they kind of argued that actually the highest percentage of world population lives in this so-called base of the pyramid. These are the people that earn less than $15 per year. They tend to be actually the people who are unconnected. They live in either rural area, remote area, or low-income neighborhood within megacities. These are the people that tend to be unconnected. Now, if you look at the map, this is how 2G is distributed worldwide. This is kind of a very recent kind of data. It's an open source. You can go to the internet and get like the density of deployment of base station, and that's how 2G deployment looks like worldwide. If you go to 3G, you get something like that. By the time you reach 4G, a lot of dark points. Obviously, if you put everything together, you get this nice, colorful map. So if you go to ITU and you look at numbers, and I cannot promise that this is the most recent numbers, but obviously, you don't have very good results. You have countries that are still basically living in the below 30 and 20% connectivity. So a lot of countries are either not connected or underconnected, which means they are basically not connected at the level you can surf comfortably with the internet. Now, the reasons are many, but I would say two of the main reasons is, number one, is an economical risk. Obviously, the mobile network operator use a return on investment model. which means they spend a lot of money to buy equipment, to do research, to deploy this equipment and maintain it. And obviously, because there's a lot of money involved also in spectrum licensing, they need to get back their money. And how do they get back their money? By installing this equipment in areas where there's a high density population. So basically, through subscription, they get back their money. In other words, it does not make much sense to deploy this equipment after you dig, let's say 100, if not thousands of kilometers of fiber or cable to reach an area that is sparsely or very kind of low populated density area. You cannot get your money like that. So that's kind of led in a way to these results. Another reason behind these bad results or bad statistics is that we tend to forget that to have a reliable communication network, you need to have an underlying reliable power network. So if there is no power system that is up and running, and many of these, let's say, countries like in Africa and so on, don't have a reliable power grid, or if it's there, it's not working properly, which means that your communication network is also going to fail or is not going to work properly. Bottom line, all of these reasons give us these bad statistics. And by the way, this is not unique to developing countries or, like, let's say, poor countries. Some of the biggest cities in the world suffer from the digital divide. Why? Because, again, there is typically a very high correlation between household income and broadband access. Companies don't put their best equipment in area where they know they will not get back money. Okay? Or people actually, even if the service is available, don't have the means, their salary, their income do not allow them to be able to have access to this service. Bottom line, what we are trying to say that there is an opportunity for 6G actually to bridge this gap, to kind of break this vicious cycle. It's like when you have a remote area and you put a highway and you try to make that area prosperous. It's the same way. This is going to be, instead of being a physical highway, what we are talking here about is like a digital highway. Connecting remote areas can give better health services, education opportunities, finance, transaction, job creation by basically bridging the digital divide. And what we're arguing for is, if you are able to connect these remote areas, you will minimize migration, you will be able to allow people to work where they live, sometimes in rural and remote areas, and you move in a way from this limited concept of a smart city to the broader concept of smart living or smart kind of environments. So, what are some of the key technologies? Number one, and that's actually a technology that's quite interesting, is essentially renewable power access point. How to design, manage, and deploy communication networks that are sustainable, that are relying only, for example, on solar panel and on wind turbines. This is to run your network, but also to charge your own phones. Quite a bit of interesting research can be done in the context of renewable powered access point or network in general. The second, and I would say most critical research topic that one can look at, is the backhaul aspect. How can we connect remote areas? How can we connect villages? How can we connect rural areas in a cost-effective fashion? And the equation is very simple. Actually, the lower the density of people, the higher you have to go. If you have very high density of population, you go for terrestrial network. You have a suburban area with a medium dense population, you want to use what we call hub. Hub stands for high altitude platform. It can be coming in the form of a balloon or a UAV or it's like a flying kind of network. Now, if you go into even lower density population, you go even higher, and then you are in the area of satellite communication. And that's why, if you're following the news, there has been this revival of satellite communication, which is kind of now maybe called in a more general term, integrated terrestrial airborne satellite communication. How to integrate these three layers to provide global connectivity. So in the area of hubs, there is quite a bit of interesting research done by, for example, Facebook and Google trying to connect remote areas with balloons and with drones. The idea here is essentially, instead of having a terrestrial cellular network, you take these balloons or drones and create a network of flying base stations. Each one has a particular covered area. They are networked together with a backhaul, like a free space optic, for example, and another UAV can be talking through a feeder link with a gateway station in the ground to connect to the internet background. As I mentioned, you want to deploy these backhauls over even lower density population. You go to all of these kind of generation or constellation rather of satellite communications. As you know, it's kind of a race between OneWeb, Starlink, that's SpaceX, Telesat LEO, and Kuiper. These are a lot of development in satellite communication, and within 1 or 2 years, you will see a lot of them being kind of deployed and being kind of used to provide internet globally. There are a lot of interesting research work to be done, how to integrate satellite with terrestrial network, how can you have, for example, decoupled network. For example, often in many of these rural areas, the bottleneck is downlink. You need to have like video streaming, for example. So what you can do, you can get your downlink from a LEO satellite, but your uplink can go through 2G link or 2G connection terrestrial. It doesn't have to be all going from the same satellite. And how you could, that's the kind of the nice thing about this new generation satellite system that are hopefully not going to be failing like what we have seen 20 years ago with the Teledesic, which was trying to do both uplink and downlink with kind of special devices and with the same kind of system of satellite. Here, the idea is to do an integrated terrestrial satellite networks where things can be done in a smarter way. Now, one particular research topic of interest to my group at KAUST is the next generation of hybrid very high throughput satellites. So this is a very interesting technology. The idea here is a satellite is a very high throughput. It can shoot to 1 terabit per second. I'm here quoting some of the paper that are doing that experimentally. It's like the DLR in Germany or NICT in Japan. And essentially it had one side of the satellite kind of connecting users through beams. These beams can be kind of steered towards different regions, different kind of direction depending on traffic evolution during the day and night. And then the whole thing is going to be backhauled through a feeder link. It's expected by 2030 that we're going to run out of Ka band, and as such, what we're looking at, along with a few other people, into free space optic feeder link, how to use laser link to kind of basically backhaul these satellites. Now, obviously, we can be subject to clouds and weather, and that's why you need to have some site diversity or like a network of optical gateway station deployed on the ground. So that's one particular area of strong interest to us, and I'm sure that there will be some more people looking at this topic. Now, obviously, once you are on the ground, you can distribute internet through TV tower that gives you essentially macro cell coverage, or through tether balloon or tether UAVs if you want to have height without building a tower. And the idea behind tether UAV or tether balloon is it solves two problems. There are a lot of interest in UAV communication, but UAV tends to have a very short lifetime of flight time. If you want to extend the flight time of a UAV, essentially you add a tether to it. It limits the basically range of hovering, but you are solving the backhaul problem from a communication perspective and the power supply problem. Now, another interesting research area that is kind of evolving is so-called IBA kind of configuration. IBA stands for Integrated Backhaul Access. So instead of having cellular network, you are having basically a mesh network where every basically access point here is acting as a relay. So some of these relay will have access to a backhaul through fiber optic or satellite, and the information is going to reach this network through multi-hops. So if you leave here, essentially through Wi-Fi hotspots, you can connect to your network. So bottom line, if you are living in this world today, ultimately, our objective is to start step by step connecting these different unconnected villages or remote areas through different solutions like tether balloon, like satellites, to eventually connect everyone. So let me kind of skip and tell you in the last 2-3 minutes what are the potential applications. For example, e-health. That's one area where basically global connectivity can be great kind of benefit to this type of services. So I have one of my colleagues, he has been working on what they call low-cost asthma monitoring kind of techniques. So as you know, if you want to monitor asthma, you need to have doctor going sometimes to remote areas. The stethoscope is quite expensive. What one of my colleagues developed is a less than $1 wearable soft acoustic sensor that you can basically fabricate yourself, do it yourself kind of fabrication process. It's layer of aluminum and sustainable material papers and tape. The patient can put it on his or her chest. You can attach to it a Bluetooth kind of device, and essentially this acoustic sensor can track your kind of asthma conditions and will kind of inform through the Bluetooth connection that is backhauled through, let's say, a satellite link, like a doctor that is living in a nearby city and can monitor hundreds, if not thousands, of patients without having to move there. So these are some of the applications that can benefit from global connectivity. Another interesting aspect that we tend to forget is that those of us who live in areas that are well connected, because we are urban environment, we are in cities, we can lose this connectivity anytime because of a flood, because of an earthquake, because of a terrorist attack. And if we invest in terms of research for basically rural connectivity, we can use that technology to help ourselves when we kind of go into a situation where, essentially, emergency situation where we lose connectivity. So as an example, in 2017, when this kind of hurricane hit the island of Puerto Rico, it was a Google Loon project, this hub kind of balloon kind of network that was able for 1 week or so to bring connectivity to the communities there until the network was back up and running. So in other words, actually, when you develop technology for rural connectivity or remote area connectivity, you are working on this kind of more global topic of so-called pop-up network. Pop-up network are networks that can be used in disaster emergency, short-term, high-capacity event, Olympic Games, World Cup. You need high capacity for a short period of time in a particular area. No need to kind of put fiber everywhere just for 2 weeks. You can kind of have a network for a couple of weeks, and at the end, dismantle this network and put somewhere else. You want to send someone to Amazon, Antarctica, you can have your pop-up network that you can deploy and connect anywhere in the world. And of course, military missions can benefit from connectivity anywhere. So when you work on this area of pop-up network, you need always to think about backhaul solution, spectrum access in your region of coverage, power supply, autonomous power supply, solar panels, wind turbine, and of course, you want to be fast in deployment. One last application. Once you connect the world, essentially to connect people, automatically you give yourself the opportunity to connect all kind of devices, all kind of sensors. And with that, you can, in real time, acquire, for example, valuable information that can be used to, for example, monitor climate change. Okay? So, connecting the world through this constellation of satellites, these hubs, and having real-time information can be useful for many other purposes beyond connecting people. As a conclusion, I would like to thank you for your attention, and I would like you to read this nice statement made by one of the greatest scientists in the past century, Tesla, who kind of 100 years ago had this very nice vision on how things are evolving. So if you read it, it's kind of as if he's living in our time and exactly thinking the way we are thinking about 6G. With that, I would like to thank you, and I would like to kind of open the floor for questions, if you want.
Есть ли вопросы к докладчику?
Пожалуйста, вопрос на английском задавайте. Да? Any questions? Please, Ushakov. Shakov from Department of Security.
Hello. Yeah, I'm working in Department of Security Communication Systems in University of Telecommunications, and my name is Igor Ushakov, and we are partly working with the security as well in wireless and in cases of 5G. Of course, not yet in 6G. So thanks for your very nice presentation. But I have a question according to security area, because it's my part of science. And as you know, as you told us, the tera waves, right? So this is very, very future for us, and this communication is not now presented in the whole world. But as part of security, there is a lot of kinds of attacks that are known, like man-in-the-middle attack and authentication and so on. So what is your opinion according to this? So in the future, if we are talking about 6G and even 5G that is going not so really fast worldwide, what is the biggest security issue from your point of view? And do you think if we have no such standards yet, if it's possible to talk about these really good things right now, because we need to know if it will be security and safety. Thanks.
Obviously, as I mentioned in my talk, there are three major, in my opinion, kind of direction or emphasis. Of course, there is kind of trying to do things faster and better. There is the aspect I talked about, which is kind of bridging the digital divide and connect people. And there is, and I mentioned like explicitly, security aspect. Security and safety is already today, and it's going to become even more important as we rely more and more in our daily life for all kind of transaction or wireless connections. So I'm not an expert in security, but I can tell you this is important. Every time you think about a communication system, you need someone to think about the security aspect. One thing I can talk about is this kind of, one second, okay, it's not connect anymore. Remember when I showed this, this kind of satellite communication link with an optical feeder link, okay? I would say that's actually one of the advantages of optical wireless communication, free space optics, because it can be combined nicely with quantum key distribution. You know, there has been quite a bit of interest in quantum communication, but maybe it's still too far. It's not going to be employed in the coming future or the near future. However, one aspect of it, which is quantum key distribution, how to secure a link, and it can be used only in conjunction with optical wires or optical fiber communication. I think there will be some interesting application for for optical wireless communication with QKD to secure many of these backhaul and these feeder links. And that can give an edge for this technology when you compare it to other RF technology that cannot benefit from quantum key distribution.
Thank you.
More questions, please. More questions, please. Please. Dmitry Tkachenko, Polytech University.
My question is concerning frequencies which are used expected to be used for 6G systems. In your presentation, you mentioned as low frequencies as TV white spaces. It is below 1 gigahertz, and you mentioned terahertz communications also. So the question, what frequencies? So is it really below 1 gigahertz is possible to use such technologies? And what about frequencies that are expected to be used for 5G, like 3.5 gigahertz, like 25 gigahertz, like 50 gigahertz? Do these frequencies also possible to use for 6G? So please comment.
Yeah, thank you very much. I mean, obviously, you know, 6G is not to be using only one part of the spectrum. The whole spectrum, I mean, people think of or talk about spectrum exhaustion, spectrum deficit. So eventually, you know, the whole spectrum is going to be used, but for different applications. So obviously, when I talk about TV white space and UHF, VHF, this is mainly in rural areas where you want to have a macro cell, so you have like a TV tower or tether balloon, and you want to have a cell of, let's say, 50-kilometer radius, because very sparsely populated. So in that case, you will go for TV white space, and you will be using this UHF, VHF prime spectrum that has very nice propagation kind of condition. Now you go into a super dense urban environment, we'll be going maybe for millimeter wave, maybe eventually for terahertz. Okay? Now you want backhaul for like point-to-point, for feeder links, maybe free space optics will be the way to go. So I'm saying, I mean, the whole spectrum is in front of us. Of course, there are a lot of challenges at different parts of the spectrum from an RF perspective, photonic perspective, but it is expected that eventually, you know, with kind of the need of different application, all of it is going to be used, probably in different contexts.
Thank you.
Any more questions, please?
My name is Kanzuba Evgeny. I am engineer of communications. I want to ask you about price. For me, information, each bit of information have price. 5G price is one kind, 6G another. If information has equivalent energy, how many energy we can produce for realize project of 6G? Where is how many energy?
You mean
Is this question about energy?
energy?
Yes.
Yeah, I mean, so obviously, being I'm talking about, if you are talking about energy efficiency or green communication, in my view, it's important in all kind of environment. If you are in a city, you would like to reduce your energy bill. Cellular company, you know, they are paying a big, huge bill for power, and as such, the more green you are, the more you are saving energy, the better it is as a company and eventually as an end user, because at the end you are going to pay a subscription that is going to be proportional to the amount of money that is used to kind of run the network. Now, if you go to these rural areas, remote areas where, as I told you, one of the main problems is there is no reliable kind of power grid. So obviously you want to go sustainable, you want to go using solar panels, wind turbine, you want to generate your own power as a telecom operator. So that basically you minimize the cost of energy supply. So green communication or energy efficient communication is needed in all kind of setups, in my view. And by the way, this reflecting surface are helping you, because what it does, it helps you extend your coverage without having to increase your level of power. You are still having a single station, but because you are putting in your neighborhood the reflecting surface, that base station is going to extend its coverage without to have to increase its power.
Thank you.
Thank you. Last question, please. No, thank you. Last question from me. Dear Professor, what do you think? Can we see differences between two most important concepts today? One concept is the sixth generation, and the second concept is the network 2030. Can you see the differences or no today?
Okay, so I think probably they are the same. As you know, at least in my view, and you know more than me, Professor Andrei, you have been here, you have been very active in ITU. So essentially, the way I have seen things evolving, at least over the time I have been research active in this area, against a 10-year cycle. The cycle starts now for 6G. It takes 2-3 years to brainstorm. So these are like a wish list, right? That's my own wish list. You talk to someone else, probably will tell you something maybe same or slightly different. But then it's going to take 3 years to converge to something more concrete, more for consensus, so that ITU come up with maybe IMT 2030 or network 2030. Yeah, so, but now is the time of speculation. Now people are kind of thinking out the box. People are putting on the table things that they think are important, technology that can be mature by 2030, but the document that's going to codify that is going to appear maybe by 2024, 2025, right? Something like that. Like IMT 2020, it was published 2014. Yeah. So that will be kind of the time where the two will converge and we'll have a clear vision what 6G will be.
Yeah. Thank you very much. Thank you very much.